teachers. Teachers at Paul J. Sorkin Junior High School in Ufielda, Iowa were surprised early this Monday by an educational change of pace instigated by the Ufielda County school system. Instead of students filing into classes to hear the teachers lecture at the head of class, teachers found themselves being herded in the classrooms where young people lectured and assigned homework to the dumbfounded grown-ups. Students infiltrated the PA system, coached the day's sports, and managed all extracurricular activities. It was a surreal experience, said one teacher when asked to describe her day. Now, I'll be asking you some questions about this newspaper clipping a little later, but I know that looking at this, you might be thinking, this is crazy, this is just really strange. Students teaching teachers, however, may not be such an isolated occurrence. If you notice a familiar face in those videos, that's because I'm there teaching over on the side, and in this case, my students are teachers. Some of you, and you probably know who you are, may be thinking along the lines of, well, you know, that's sort of disturbing. It's really messing up the natural order of the universe. But my way of thinking is that it can be a good idea to hear two sides of the issue. It can be a good idea to step into someone else's shoes. The insights we learn can help us form the education systems of the future. It's a widely held belief that education has a lot of catching up to do when it comes to the future. It's not just education either. I know that you may have heard young people, and sometimes on comedy talk shows, you will hear a lot of belittlement saying that the over 40 age group, you know, they can't use their phones, they're not very technology adept. In fact, I heard from an anonymous source who happens not to be here, so I guess I could say her name, but I did hear old people on Facebook, that's just wrong. I don't want to name names, but that is a real quote. Maybe it's less about technology, or less about ability when it comes to technology, and more about circumstance. Obviously, when you were growing up, unless you happen to be around the same age as I am, I'm guessing that you didn't know how to blog, tweet, social network online. I was watching my mom on one of those rare occasions when she lets me stay up that late. I was watching a little bit of Jay Leno, and Justin Bieber was on. I'm not a huge Bieber fan, but he said something, and I'm not sure how many of you guys saw this, but he was like to Jay Leno, yeah, back in those days when you had wooden cars or something like that. And it just made me think about the fact that although they may not have been wooden cars, students today, like me, we live in a world that's increasingly very technology-driven. Could you have predicted 20, 30 years ago that tweet would become common usage and friend would become a verb? I'm inviting all of you to put on your student hats and imagine that you're someone my age. So in my 13 years, I've seen a fair amount of change. I've seen the switch from VCRs and videotapes to TiVos and DVDs. My generation has grown up with cell phones, internet, email, calculators, but one of the things which I thought really highlights this change was seeing the protests in Egypt, and before that, the protests in Iran. Where are the nightly news channels getting their news from? They're sending reporters to the field, sure, but often we get a lot of news, sometimes news that can't be seen by giant, bulky news cameras, from Twitter, from Facebook, from social networking outlets. The eyewitness reports, if you will, of the 21st century. Like yesterday's students, today's students have many different career options ahead of them, but the kinds of career options that we have ahead of us are a little different. We know that society has changed over time. It's gone from agrarian to more city-based. The assembly line has sped up production, but I found it really interesting reading some articles that I saw someone who was a menu psychologist. They had a quote from so-and-so menu psychologist, and I thought, you know, that's a weird job. It's one that you never would have heard probably a couple decades ago, even maybe a couple years ago. Forensic accounting. And what little boy or girl told their parents that they wanted to work in green funeral directing? That was also a slightly interesting job title. I'm not sure any boy or girl really asks that now either, but it's still something to think about. Many job titles which were commonplace have gone out of existence, and job titles which were not in existence a few years ago have become commonplace. So this change just really lays the background, I think, for some of the talk about technology and students. When it comes to jobs, the US Department of Labor estimates that today's learner will have 10 to 14 jobs by the age of 38, and that's the average. In the olden days, you would graduate from high school or college, get a job, and it was probably ideal to stay with it for the rest of your life. You might have a very steady, a very good job. And today, a more competitive and volatile economy means that the playing field has expanded exponentially. We heard during the State of the Union, there's competition from other places. We need to measure up. We need to do big things. I was watching the whole thing on TV. And I thought that that was really, again, representative of what has changed so much over the past few years. So what does all this mean for 21st century students, and what does it mean for 21st century schools? In order to best shape paths for students like me, I think that we have to understand what sets the old and the new apart, a tale of two paths, if you will. You might wonder, well, why can't we continue to do the same things? I mean, this is an education system, the same method of learning that we used hundreds of years ago has turned out our great presidents and thinkers and artists. But the thing is, in a changed and exponentially changing world, that same approach may no longer work for everybody. In an age of global connections, today's students are diverse in their backgrounds, how they learn, ethnicity, culture, skill level. There's so many differences, and it's hard to use a one-size-fits-all approach. And I know that those of you in Title I schools know especially about this when it comes to diversity and different kinds of backgrounds. The 21st century has brought innovations in science, technology, transportation, and how we get our information. So when it comes to learning and teaching, I truly believe that it's time for education to catch up with us and the 21st century. Being on both sides of the classroom, learning from students, means using some of the tools that matter to us. We know that we can create this innovative classroom with the help of technology, but when it comes to technology itself, you might ask, well, who will help us? Because you see with job titles like technology coordinator, you often have to have a go-between, someone to set everything up, troubleshoot, that kind of thing. Raise your hand if you've ever had issues with a piece of technological equipment. I think probably every hand will be unanimous. And it's not just in school, it's at home. It's pretty much anywhere you are, if there's something that can go wrong, it will at some point or another go wrong. So you might be thinking, sort of distracting, I don't know if I want to bring this into classrooms at my school. But now raise your hand if you've ever asked someone younger than you, possibly a kid, for help with a piece of technology. And I honestly have to raise my hand because I've done that. Incredibly, you might think, well, she's 13, but I actually have. I could be wrong, but I think that I see a little bit of a trend here. As I said in my introduction, our world has been technology-filled since the day of our birth. That doesn't mean that we are better at technology. It may just mean that with certain things, we're a little more intuitive, like, for instance, touch screens. Like my dad and me, when we're on an iPad, I usually try to figure things out. It's a little more foreign to him. So I would bet that there's more adults who can do like some really advanced stuff with coding and programming, but kids, the consumer electronics, I think it's a little more intuitive. And it might make some people uncomfortable or scared that kids can be able to navigate around a smartphone easier than they can, but if you find yourself in this position, it's okay, as long as you're open-minded about catching up. As a case in point of this kind of attitude, this is my dad. Oops. This is my dad, John Svitak, and he's been interested in Facebook for some time now. He even checked out books from the library about Facebook. But yeah, Facebook for Dummies. Representative change here. If I had issues with Facebook, I would probably look it up online. But what's nice about my dad being on Facebook is that it's given my sister and I the chance to actually teach him something. Because usually it's us asking him the questions. What's the deal with ionic and covalent bonds? Again, exactly how do I solve this inequality? So it's an empowering feeling to, for once, have it the other side around. They say that old dogs can't learn new tricks. That's very much not true. My dad is a quick learner when it comes to Facebook. He was already posting on his wall, getting all of his old high school and college friends. And I also set up a blog for him, johnfsvitak.blogspot.com, showed him the basics of an interactive whiteboard, and my sister and I can also be credited with getting him hooked on the addictive cell phone game Angry Birds. So now he can check all those off the list. The funny thing is, with the possible exception of Angry Birds, all these things that we showed him how to do have actually equaled more in-person conversation. The reason I say with the exception of Angry Birds is because unless he's like asking us about, oh, this bird went off again. But I would say that for the upper two, which he does far more often, we've actually been talking. We've been talking about here's a best practice to use, yeah, honestly, on the interactive whiteboard, et cetera. So I highly encourage you to do the same, maybe with your own children, maybe with your students. Come to the side of the classroom and ask your students, what tools do you like to use? What helps you learn? And what are some kinds of technology that you enjoy using? Maybe not necessarily for education, but games that you play, technology that you use. But to put my teacher hat back on, when you hear all this stuff about technology, social networking, you might think of LOLing, OMGing, and Are You a Cookie quizzes on Facebook. Because that is, when you look at it, a lot of what gets sent. We send one-line emails with more emoticons than words sometimes. One thing I worry about is that while the internet obviously allows us to reach out on a wider scale, we can message someone in India or Sri Lanka or China or Africa or Europe easily just with the click of a button. So it's allowed us to go much wider. I'm worried maybe that we haven't been concerned about going as deep. When you had to write out a letter that would take like 3 months to post, you might think more carefully, you might write more, you might write better. All the shallow communication we have today might make you skeptical about its ability to really affect meaningful change. Maybe you've seen evidence to the contrary. Raise your hand if you've ever seen your son, daughter, or a student get distracted by texting or Facebook or something like that. Okay, I see some raised hands. I can't raise my hand, obviously, as I don't have kids, but I can attest to my sister. My older sister has done that. I would argue that just as I've seen kids who slack off, who send messages all the time on Facebook, I've seen kids who use the internet to post meaningful work and help others. We often hear about adults searching for the meaning of life, searching for purpose in life, but not very much thought is given to the fact that kids want meaning as well, particularly in our education. I ran a conference in September called TEDx Redmond. TEDx events are independently organized TED events, and TEDx Redmond was unique in that it was all organized by those under 18. Our attendees in the main room were all kids, and all of our speakers were kids. So we had 18 of the best and brightest kids out there pretty much to come and speak on our stage. It was a kid's eye view on everything from education to the environment. And one of the speakers who we heard in the Rethinking Education topic was Zoe Sprinkle, and we heard from her about the issue of impact, effect, and purpose. So you can take a look at, oh, sorry.
I was amazed at how such a rich, full tone could emerge from this minute little girl. From an early age, Zoe was captivated with writing, theater, and singing. Her passions have since developed. Zoe has performed at many venues in her community and takes great pride in her numerous contributions at the Seacoast Repertory Theater in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She believes that the arts can have an incredible impact on the world, as they have had for her. Zoe recently started a blog, Footprints on Paper, on which she shares short stories as well as other creative ideas. She plans to continue pursuing her passions and her strong dedication to the arts. Please welcome Zoe Sprinkle to the stage.
Impact, effect, purpose. These words are very powerful. For kids and even adults, they're sometimes intimidating. We find ourselves asking, am I making an impact? Will it have an effect on the world? Does it have a purpose? Hi, I'm Zoe Sprinkle, and I am a student. For most of my life, I have learned in a boring little classroom, where I'm guessing most of you have as well. Our work and achievements are kept quiet and conserved on the gray walls of our small classroom. No impact, no effect on the world around us, and mostly, no purpose. Now, I know this does not sound the least bit positive, yet it is the truth. This has been my learning experience. I call this speech footprints because isn't that what we want students to be doing? Making a footprint in the world? Now, some students may think, this is impossible. I'm just a kid in my own little private world. Now, some ways we make footprints today are with tools on the internet, YouTube, Facebook, or even posting on mylifeisaverage.com. There are so many ways for kids to promote themselves on the web. Hopefully, these tools are helping us make an impact, effect, purpose. Some kids may be watching at home thinking, all these speakers are so incredible. How could I ever do the things they have done? That's what I thought when I saw the lineup. But the thing is, you can change the world with something as small and simple as a note.
Could you please hit pause?
This summer, I was so happy because I would get.
Thank you. Yes. So unfortunately, the whole speech is actually fairly short, so I highly encourage all of you to go to tedxredmond.com. She actually sings, which is very nice. But I just wanted to show you that part because what Zoe said really struck a chord with me. I was watching the nightly news on Saturday, and I saw a story about Ronald McNair, Dr. Ronald McNair, who was an astronaut, and he died in the Challenger shuttle tragedy. And the story, it was quite interesting because it didn't focus so much on his distinguished career, but rather something that he did as a little boy. As ABC News wrote, in 1959, when McNair was just 9 years old, he famously made a scene at the Lake City Public Library when he attempted to check out books on advanced science and calculus. 9-year-old advanced science and calculus is pretty incredible. The librarian, however, refused to release them because McNair was African American. It was the segregated South, and African Americans were not allowed to check out books in McNair's library. Instead of giving up, the 9-year-old hoisted himself onto the counter and said he wasn't leaving without the books. His persistence paid off in the short term and in the long run. He went on to MIT and became an astronaut. Kids can have an impact, whether by writing a note, as Zoe said, or taking a stand. Yet students making a difference is an idea that is seemingly little explored within our schools. One of the most common complaints from students is that school is boring. As you heard Zoe say, that she had learned in a boring little classroom, and I hear this so much. When I look on Facebook and I see everyone's posts, it's like, school is boring, I have to go to school tomorrow, there's not a snow day or something like that. And I think that this has a lot of different reasons, and some of it is kind of, in the case of some of those Facebook posts, is just being lazy. But in other cases, it's because, and I know some students who love learning, who are very accomplished, but they think school's boring, and that's because they have no impact. They have no purpose within the walls of their classroom. TED India speaker Kiran Bir Sethi gave a speech about how she was trying to change that.
Contagious is a good word. Even in the times of H1N1, I like the word. Laughter is contagious. Passion is contagious. Inspiration is contagious. We've heard some remarkable stories from some remarkable speakers. But for me, what was contagious about all of them was that they were infected by something I call the I can bug. So the question is, why only them? In a country of 1 billion people and some, why so few? Is it luck? Is it chance? Can we all not systematically and consciously get infected? So in the next 8 minutes, I would like to share with you my story. I got infected when I was 17. When as a student of the design college, I encountered adults who actually believed in my ideas, challenged me, and had lots of cups of chai with me. And I was struck by just how wonderful it felt, and how contagious that feeling was. I also realized I should have got infected when I was 7. So when I started Riverside School 10 years ago, it became a lab to prototype and refine a design process that could consciously infect the mind with the I can bug. And I uncovered that if learning is embedded in real-world context, that is, if you blur the boundaries between school and life, then children go through a journey of aware, where they can see the change, enable, be changed, and then empower, lead the change. And that directly increased student well-being. Children became more competent and less helpless. But this is all common sense. So I'd like to show you a little glimpse of what common practice looks like at Riverside. A little background. When my grade 5 was learning about child rights, they were made to roll incense sticks, agarbattis, for 8 hours to experience what it means to be a child laborer. It transformed them. What you will see is their journey, and then their utter conviction that they could go out and change the world. So that's them rolling. And in 2 hours, after their backs broke, they were changed. And once that happened, they were out in the city, convincing everybody that child labor just had to be abolished. And look at Raghav, that moment when his face changes because he's been able to understand that he has shifted that man's mindset. And that can't happen in a classroom. So when Raghav experienced that, he went from teacher told me to I am doing it. And that's the I can mind shift. And it is a process that can be energized and nurtured. But we had parents who said, okay, making our children good human beings is all very well, but what about math and science and English? Show us the grades. And we did. The data was conclusive. When children are empowered, not only do they do good, they do well.
So I'm going to stop it there, and again, I encourage you to watch the rest of that speech. And then they went on. They didn't just try to end child labor excuse me, in their city. They also went and talked to the police. They went and talked to the city officials. They went and talked to elders within the community and told them, you need to realize the potential of children. So they established a day every other month where they closed off the busiest streets and had a day for children to just come out and play and talk and have a great time. So I thought that was huge. It was really powerful because it showed how students can affect change on such a level. But not all schools make students experience child labor firsthand in order to get them to make a difference. In a striking example of social technology helping global awareness, the World Food Programme's Free Rice Initiative gets students to answer quiz questions, and this is entirely free. It's on a range of topics. And for every question that you answer correctly, you donate 10 grains of rice to a hungry person. The site sponsors pay for the rice. And so the rice adds up, and it helps the hungry. And I hope all of you will join my group, which is, you can find it by searching Adora. The point is that what Free Rice has done is unique, not in that it's getting people to have an impact, but the fact that it's allowing people to have an impact from their computers by not necessarily just donating money, but actually by playing, by learning. This might seem like a basic application on the surface, but the lessons that we learn from Free Rice, having an impact through learning, the power of word of mouth and social media to do good, those are things which I find incredibly applicable to education. There are examples of service learning taking place every day here in the US. I was reading an article in Edutopia which talked about social media and education that mentioned this example. The science teacher, Brian Kiva, asked his 8th grade students to pick a problem in their community and try to solve it. So they picked buffalo grass, which is this really fast-growing grass that is resistant to fire. It's an erosion control and cattle feed, but it devours the habitat, and it's very destructive, so it's basically an invasive plant. So once the students discovered this, then they decided to spread the word about how terrible it was. And they created a Facebook page devoted to the threat, and they even posted a rap song on YouTube, the Buffalo rap, as they called it, very dramatic. If it doesn't load, that's okay. But basically what they did was they went and gave the background about buffalo grass, but instead of just doing a sort of, this is what buffalo grass is, and they went and rapped about it, which was very, very funny. And what ended up happening was that they posted this video, and they had a good time. If you see from, obviously, millions lose their lives as millions of plants, but what they did was then they learned about buffalo grass. They learned about this issue in their community. They learned how to get the word out. They had this firsthand experience.
And as you can see, there are seeds on the buffalo grass.
And so what Brian Kiva, this teacher, did was not only get students to learn about this issue, but he created students who loved the learning process. And that, to me, is something that's incredibly important. Because using the social networking tools of our age, as the Edutopia article continued, this one Tucson teacher and a small group of students began to educate politicians, farmer, and Facebook fans like me. Using 21st century tools, they've become advocates for their own local community. And so one of the things that I like best about this example is that it really made learning relevant to the kids. There was student choice involved. They chose what the issue was. They chose how they would solve it. They were extremely creative in this. And by taking ownership over their learning, they'd become interested in this issue, which, if a science teacher just suddenly started talking about buffalo grass, it might not be super interesting, but the fact that they discovered it themselves and took action was incredibly important. So what can you do? Ask yourself, what's my community's buffalo grass? Or you can probably find something incredibly important. What can my students do? How can my students take action? Many focus on students graduating from high school and going to college as the beginning of making a difference. After they graduate from high school, go to college, get a job, then they can have an impact on the world. But I think that the real diagram should look more like this. You go to school, you graduate from high school, go to college, get a job, and make a difference at the same time as you're in school, as you're growing up. I believe that students can begin making a difference, solving problems within their communities far earlier. In other words, make a difference no matter how young. A classroom where students have the opportunity to solve real-life problems is an innovative classroom. I believe that an innovative classroom isn't just one in which the world comes to us. It's where we come to the world, where we can help the world. It's one where we can have voice in education decisions that will affect our future, where we're connected in more ways than one, not just in person, but also online, where we use online technology like blogging or social networking to create meaningful work. Yet there are obstacles to this vision. I read a CNN article, as you can tell I love to watch the news and get information all the time, and this was really striking because it said that most children, 82% of children in the Western world, have an online footprint by the age of 2. In the US, 92% of 2-year-olds are pictured somewhere on the web. These are incredible figures. However, I would wonder if some of the students you serve are among the 8% without a digital footprint at a young age due to either less home access to technology than more affluent counterparts. I don't have data on this, but I know that technology penetration may not be as great within students' homes. And I strongly believe that technology has to become a democratizing, not a dividing factor when it comes to learning. President Obama talked about closing the achievement gap. And I think that this is something technology must help us do. Most people probably agree with me when I say that the internet has changed our approach to knowledge. But my dad was like, hey, it's not just internet, it was books. So if the internet is our printing press of the modern age, then just as the printing press made the value of books, which used to be copied out by hand very laboriously by monks in their monasteries, then the internet has made information plentiful and cheap. But if the internet is the printing press of our times, then too many teachers and students are stuck as those monks copying books out by hand. Why should learning be restricted to an hour of class time per subject? By giving students continuous access to learning resources with technology at school and at home, you're allowing them to be surrounded by learning. I've talked a lot about technology, but some of the things that make classrooms great and schools innovative are things which aren't new or technological at all. They have to do with tried and true methods that have been around as long as the profession of teaching and educating. Think back to some of the best teachers you ever had. They could be in elementary, middle, high school, mentors outside of school, whatever teachers, whoever you consider the best teacher you ever had. Now think, why do you think they were so effective? Raise your hands if you felt that your best teachers made a personal connection with you, that they knew you, that they cared about your learning. I'm seeing a lot of raised hands. Most of you can likely agree that your best teachers really connected with you. It's this personal connection that we have to strive for in our teaching, because learning is about connecting facts and places and ideas, but also connecting people. You have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of my role as an educator? Maybe you administrate your school, oversee projects, lead changes, all incredibly important things, but one of the most important things you do is form personal connections with your students. If you think back to your best teachers, they probably weren't the ones who read line by line out of the textbook and taught classes like automated systems. They were the ones who cared about your learning, took interest in you and what you did. Personal relationships with your students in other words, affect how well your students learn. And this is something which I'm sure you all know. You've probably seen this over the years in the teaching profession. So teacher-student relationships can even affect us before we get to be of school age. I was watching a speech at an event, TEDx Rainier, and Patricia Kuhl is a professor of speech and hearing sciences at University of Washington, and she works with early childhood development. So to summarize her speech, at birth, babies are citizens of the world. They recognize syllables and sounds from all kinds of different languages across the spectrum, not just the language they're born into. But after constant exposure to one language, they become nationalized. They lose that ability. When that was counteracted, when American babies had a Mandarin assistant, an assistant speaking Mandarin Chinese to them, then they still recognized syllables from Chinese as well as English. However, hearing previously recorded Mandarin on audio or on television had absolutely no effect. So what does this mean? It just goes to show the importance of personal connections, of a person there. I would like to sincerely congratulate you on all of your effort and hard work, because I know that you may be more than just your student's teacher or principal. You may be your students' mentors, role models, who they aspire to be in life. I'd like to thank you all for the great honor of coming here to speak. It's been an incredible experience for me already in the short time that I've been here, because I know that I'll be learning so much over the coming days. Although the newspaper clipping I showed at the beginning of the session, I want to quickly ask a question about that. Raise your hand if you think this is a real newspaper clipping from the Ufield Herald that I tore out and scanned in. Raise your hand if you think that I fabricated this. I actually made that up online using a fake newspaper clipping generating service, which actually exists. But although this newspaper clipping may not be true, as I'm sure many of you guessed at the beginning, you truly can learn a lot from young people. That's something